Shalom, this is Dr. Jonathan Bentovish again, and I'm recording a special presentation about God's physics new scientific paradigm in this very special and holy day of Yud Aleph Nissan, the day of the birth date of Nissan, the leader of Israel, the Rabbi Lubavitcher and Melech HaMashiach. And I wanna the topic of today's presentation is that Geulah is here, based on this new scientific paradigm, which is being accepted increasingly as the new scientific paradigm for the 21st century. And I'll talk about this briefly. Based on the acceptance of this new God's physics scientific paradigm as the new scientific paradigm for 21st century science, we are reaching that very special phase in human development and the universe's development, which is essentially Geulah. That's exactly the same message and the same truth that Nissan, the leader of Israel, the Rabbi, has been calling us and urging us to realize. The Rabbi is saying that Geulah is here. We only have to open our eyes and see it. And I will start by focusing or mentioning what the Rabbi is teaching us, and then explain how the new God's physics scientific paradigm is bringing humanity, science and humanity more generally, exactly to this exciting and profound new phase in the world's and the universe's existence. The Rebbe is teaching us that the difference between Galus and Geulah, between the current state or the state of the world before this profound change of Geulah, is Aleph, Alufo Shel Olam. In other words, that the world that is lacking the recognition of Hashem, of God's presence and God's soul presence and governing of the world, this world is a world of Galus, a world of darkness, a world in which we are led to believe that everything happens just by chance, God forbid. And what's necessary and what the Rebbe has been calling us all along and is calling us increasingly is to open our eyes and see that the Geulah is here. The Geulah is a state in which we realize that God, the Shem, is at the center of the whole universe, of our whole life, that it is the sole reality behind everything. So let me begin by explaining this profound change that's taking place today in the 21st century science and physics, more specifically, and that was the reason that I wrote the God's Physics book. God's Physics book has appeared and has been published in the US by iUniverse.com and all across the globe. Now it's being translated into Hebrew and will be, Bezrat Hashem, God willing, published in Israel, in South America, and other places. So the starting point is that we understand that science is not a static, does not exist in a static manner. Science undergoes, as the famous philosopher of science Thomas Kuhn taught us, science is undergoing what he called paradigmatic shifts or leaps in our understanding of the reality. A classical example is what happened 100 years ago, in 1905, 1915, then 1919, with Einstein's general theory of relativity. That was a major leap, a major paradigmatic shift from the older paradigm of Newtonian mechanics. And what Thomas Kuhn is telling us is that when science reaches a point where the existing existent paradigm or scientific framework for understanding the universe is too narrow, then science undergoes a major breakthrough, a major paradigmatic shift. And I gave the example of a person being born in a room, confined room, and that person, all that person knows of the world is his or her confined room. And that's good enough for a while. That's a metaphor, of course, but that's good enough for a while until there's knocks on the door or something bouncing on the window, the sealed window, and that person starts realizing, hey, there's something outside my room. And eventually they summon enough courage to open the door or open the window and realize that room is good enough, but it's part of, it exists, but it's part of a house, and that house is part of a neighborhood, etc. That is a metaphor for how science evolves, according to Thomas Kuhn, essentially telling us that the room is part of the reality, but the broader and more exhaustive, more complete truth is that the room is part of a house, and the house part of a neighborhood and a city, etc. And so in 1905, 1915, 1919, that was when Eddington, the famous British astronomer, actually tested one of the unique critical predictions of Einstein's general theory of relativity. And he found out that the predictions of Einstein's relativity theory were more accurate than Newton's classical mechanics. And essentially, by contrasting and testing and seeing that the predictions of general relativity theory turned out to be more accurate than the predictions of Newtonian mechanics, at that point Einstein's general theory of relativity triumphed, and it was accepted across the board by scientists and by science more generally as the new, more accurate, more valid theory for 20th century physics and science. And that's essentially exactly what's happening now. Right now, over the past 5 to 7 years, science has been undergoing a paradigmatic shift from the old material causal paradigm, that's the paradigm of general theory of relativity and of quantum mechanics, relativity theory about the macroscopic universe, and quantum mechanics about the microscopic subatomic realm, but they both share a basic, what I call material causal assumption. They both assume that the universe is a material entity and that it operates by cause and effect. I'll explain this in a bit, but essentially when that old paradigm of 20th century physics, like Newtonian mechanics before it, it's done very well. It's allowed us to understand various aspects of the large universe, the expanding universe. It's allowed us to understand certain dynamics within the subatomic realm, but it's reached the limits of its usefulness. It's like that house now being opened up and realize that house is part of a neighborhood. That house in and of itself is a little bit too confined. It doesn't include the whole reality. And therefore, what we realize is that science is undergoing a paradigmatic shift akin to what happened 100 years ago in 1919 when Eddington verified that Einstein's general relativity theory unique prediction, was more accurate than Newtonian unique prediction. That was about Mercury's double-valued perihelion pathway curvature around the sun. I talked about this in previous presentations, and now we're actually standing at a very exciting historic point where there are already two unique critical predictions of the new God's physics paradigm, which I spoke about. Essentially, one about the accelerated, non-continuous accelerated expansion of the universe, and the second one about what's called the proton radius puzzle. In any event, there's two instances in which the new God's physics paradigm has unique critical predictions that are different than the predictions of relativity theory and quantum mechanics. And the exciting part is that we already have two validations, empirical validations, just like Eddington's validation of general theory of relativity prediction about Mercury's perihelion pathway around the sun. Same manner, we now have two critical predictions of the new God's physics paradigm, which are more valid than the predictions of relativity theory and quantum mechanics. And therefore, and again, there's been now up to 80 articles, scientific peer-reviewed articles that have been published in international journals. The God's Physics, a book published by iUniverse.com. I've been invited to open international scientific conferences with a keynote opening lecture about this new scientific paradigm of 21st century, which is God's physics. And so we've now reached the point where science and scientists are recognizing and embracing this new God's physics paradigm as the new valid or more valid, more comprehensive, more exhaustive scientific paradigm of 21st century physics and science. And again, it includes both relativity theory and quantum mechanics as special cases within that broader understanding. Perhaps just a pointer at the bottom of this profound new God's physics book, there is the universal computational formula. Essentially, that formula is the first time in physics that the four basic physical features of space, time, energy, and mass have been completely unified in one formula. In contrast, for example, to Einstein's general theory of relativity, considered to be the greatest intellectual achievement by any individual human being, that was a great achievement for science. But Einstein, the great Einstein, was able to unify in general relativity theory between pairs of these four physical features. So space-time became a four-dimensional continuum, and then energy mass, the energy mass equivalence of E equals mc squared, which stands at the basis of atomic energy, that unified between energy and mass. And then space-time, according to general theory of relativity, is curved by massive objects. But still, general theory of relativity was not able to unify completely between these four basic physical features. And in contrast, the new God's physics paradigm, and specifically within it, at the heart of this God's physics new paradigm, there is the universal computational formula, which essentially is able to unify between space, time, energy, and mass. And I'm going to speak now about the major discovery and some of the key theoretical postulates of this new God's physics paradigm. And then this would lead us to a realization of the great truth of the Lubavitcher Rabbi, the leader of the Jewish people in this generation, telling us to open our eyes and see the reality and see that Geulah is here. I think that the major, if I had to summarize or highlight what's the major discovery and breakthrough of this new God's physics paradigm, is the fact that in order to resolve the contradiction between relativity theory and quantum mechanics, and remember, whenever science has to make that leap, that paradigmatic shift, opening the door from the room, confined room, to the house, from the house to the neighborhood, etc., that is preceded by a crisis of the old paradigm. And the crisis of the old paradigm, for example, in Newtonian mechanics, which preceded Einstein's general theory of relativity, there was a contradiction between Newtonian mechanics and Maxwellian theory. There was an inability of the old paradigm back then, Newtonian mechanics, to explain a key phenomenon or a key assumption that the old paradigm had, which was the ether concept. That was a purely hypothetical element that was supposed to perfuse the whole universe. And when many scientists and experimental physicists, including Michelson, Morley, and others, tried to verify and actually find out and test for the existence of that ether concept, they couldn't find it. And Einstein, in his great genius, after many years of trying to find the ether concept and failing to do so, Einstein's great genius came in and he said, well, if you can't find the ether concept or the ether element, then we have to discard it. And in a sense, right now we're standing at an equivalent point, because that crisis between relativity theory and quantum mechanics, they contradict each other. I won't get into details, but there's a basic contradiction between relativity theory that speaks about the speed of light barrier and quantum mechanics that gives a specific phenomenon which is called quantum entanglement, which seems to contradict that speed of light barrier. So there seems to be a basic inconsistency between relativity theory and quantum mechanics, and equivalent to the major phenomena of the ether concept, which was a purely hypothetical concept and couldn't be found, equivalent to that, currently for the past 2 decades, there is a purely hypothetical concept which is called dark matter, dark energy, and that those purely hypothetical concepts of dark matter, dark energy are assumed to comprise up to 95% of all the mass and energy in the universe. And that's an impossible situation, because for 2 full decades, scientists and physicists all over the world have been trying to detect and to validate the existence of these purely hypothetical dark matter, dark energy concepts, but they couldn't do so. They failed to find the ether concept. And so I've done something similar to what Einstein has done, followed in his great footsteps, and I essentially discarded dark matter, dark energy as superfluous, as non-existent, in the same manner that Einstein discarded the ether concept as superfluous, as non-existent. So the way that this new God's physics paradigm, scientific paradigm, which is being accepted as a new scientific paradigm for 21st century physics, the way that this new God's physics paradigm is able to resolve the apparent inconsistency between relativity theory and quantum mechanics is through this major discovery of a new higher ordered singular universal computational / consciousness principle, or UCP, acronym UCP. This UCP, this universal computational / consciousness principle, is assumed to now compute the whole universe, or all the spatial pixels, all the atoms and the subatomic particles, the suns, the galaxies, our bodies, everything in the universe is being computed simultaneously by this UCP, creating each time a 3-dimensional universal frame. I'll give a metaphor which I use about the cinematic film metaphor, in the same manner that when we see a film depiction going on, and we see, let's say, a plane zooming through the screen, and the plane seems to have great velocity, and if we wish, or if we wanted to, we could even measure the velocity of the plane on the screen. So it seems to have a great velocity, a great energy. But then if we stopped the progression of the film and we inspected or analyzed each frame separately and the series of frames, we would find out that the plane really doesn't have any energy or velocity. The plane has been presented at one point, and then in the first frame, then another point at the second frame, etc. So we realize the fact that according to the cinematic film metaphor, we see a reality, we see a world that seems real. It seems alive. People are walking, planes are zooming through the skies, birds are flying, etc., etc. But when we actually stop the progression of the film, we see that that reality is not what it seems. Einstein had a great remark. He said that common sense is only that which is common to the senses. And by the way, much of his breakthroughs came from his ability to look at the world like a child, to re-examine some of our basic assumptions, which led him to a broader understanding of what how the universe really operates. But again, even Einstein's great general theory of relativity has reached its limits, and now the new God's physics paradigm, which is being accepted as the new paradigm, is giving us even a broader understanding of the universe, and that broader understanding of the universe has discovered that even though the universe seems to us very real, and objects seem to have properties of space, time, energy, and mass. In reality, according to this new God's physics paradigm, there is only one singular element, higher ordered singular element, which is called the universal computational consciousness principle. That UCP is hypothesized to create a series of universal frames. So each universal frame, like the film frame, depicts or presents simultaneously all the objects in the world, in the universe, and it's presenting them or computing them simultaneously. Between one frame and the subsequent frame, the whole universe dissolves back into this UCP, and then this UCP produces again another frame, by the way, a little bit larger, more extended than the previous frame, and that is the source of the explanation, the alternative explanation for dark matter, dark energy. I hope I can get into that. But in any event, the new God's physics paradigm is telling us the universe is not a static, constant phenomenon. The universe is being created, dissolved, recreated, and evolved by this UCP. And this major discovery of the existence of this higher ordered singular UCP is bringing with it a tremendous new light, a tremendous new broader understanding of the reality, and it's actually leading science and humanity to that ultimate realization of what the Rebbe is telling us, that the Geulah is here, that the reality is this singular higher ordered universal consciousness principle, reality, in religious terms, God. So I want to lead us to this new exciting understanding, which is, by the way, extremely important, not just for scientists, but for the whole of humanity, the Jewish people, and actually all the people in the world. So by discovering this singular higher ordered UCP, universal computational / consciousness principle, we're getting to a point where we start understanding that the universe does not operate by cause and effect. I said that the old paradigm, I called it the material causal paradigm. And the material causal paradigm essentially assumed that the universe is material and that everything in the universe operates by cause and effect. Maybe the classical example would be the Big Bang model, which is part of Einstein's general theory of relativity, or extension of that, the relativity theory. The Big Bang model assumes essentially that there was a nuclear event, an initial nuclear event that created the stars, the planets, all the space, energy, mass, etc. in the universe. But that's a material causal assumption that assumes that there is a cause and effect between, let's say, the initial nuclear Big Bang event and the creation of mass, energy, galaxies, stars, etc. But according to the new God's physics paradigm, according to the new God's physics paradigm, that's impossible. The new God's physics paradigm is telling us that since the UCP is computing simultaneously all the points, all the atoms, all the subatomic particles, all the suns, the planets, our bodies, the cells in our bodies, everything in the universe is being created and computed simultaneously in each frame, for each frame, each subsequent frame. So we cannot have cause and effect within any frame or between any one frame and the subsequent frame, because the whole universe then dissolves back into this UCP. I give a metaphor which is somewhat helpful to show the impossibility of cause and effect in a standard way or material causal manner that we've been accustomed to think. If we saw a film depicting a cup, a glass cup filled with water or tea, and we had a hammer, in this case the cell phone, hitting the glass cup and then shattering it, and the tea is spilled over the table, it seems as if there's cause and effect. But the point, the critical point, is when we slow the progression of the film and we look each frame, one frame at a time, we examine it, and we see in the first frame they appear simultaneously. Second frame they appear simultaneously. Even when in the third frame, let's say when they're touching each other, they're still appearing simultaneously. obviously when you have two things appearing at the same time, there cannot be cause and effect, because cause is assumed to precede, come before the effect. But because they're presented simultaneously at all points, there cannot be any cause and effect. So the new paradigm is actually called the acausal computational paradigm, and it's telling us that we don't have cause and effect. We have the producer of the film arranging the film in such a manner that seems to suggest there's cause and effect, but really there's no cause and effect. It's not that the hammer has shattered the glass cup and caused the spillage of the tea. That's not the case. It's a more accurate description is the producer of the film has arranged a series of frames in which they become closer and closer, and it gives us the impression that there is cause and effect. In other words, the laws of nature that we know of, according to the new God's physics understanding paradigm, is an arrangement by this singular higher ordered universal consciousness or computational principle that gives us the appearance as if there is cause and effect and certain laws of nature, but really those laws of nature are produced and sustained by this universal consciousness reality or principle. So we're starting to change now dramatically our understanding of the universe. The universe is not a material constant phenomena or existence. The universe does not operate by cause and effect. The universe is really a continuous progression and production and process of evolution that is created and sustained, dissolved, created and sustained, by the way, many trillions or billions of times per second, according to this new God's physics paradigm, by this singular higher ordered universal consciousness principle reality. And this is the time actually to speak about two profound theoretical postulates, which I'm going to speak about together. They're really pointing at the same profound change in our understanding of the universe. Those are called the computational invariance principle and the universal consciousness reality. And essentially they're telling us that since the only element, the only principle that remains constant both during each consecutive frame and in between any two frames is this universal computational principle or consciousness principle, UCP, because that remains constant and continuous and uniform both during each frame in which it's computing and creating the whole universe, and in between every two consecutive frames in which only this UCP exists, and the physical universe, all the atoms in the universe, our bodies, the cells in our bodies, the planets, the stars, the galaxies, they all dissolve in between the frames. So the computational invariance principle is telling us that the only real reality that remains continuous and constant to this is this UCP. That UCP is appears both or exists both in between the frames in which the universe dissolves and during the frames in which it, in a sense, manifests as the universe. And the other theoretical postulate is called the universal conscious reality, which is a continuation of this the same discovery, and that is that really because the only reality is this UCP, which exists both in between the frames and during the frames, then we only have one reality. That reality is called the universal consciousness reality, and that universal consciousness reality exists both during the frame in which it appears as the physical universe, as our bodies, as the atoms in the world, etc., and it exists without the physical universe in and of itself in between the frames. But it's one singular universal consciousness reality. So we're starting now to transform and metamorphosize our understanding of the universe from a material causal universe in which everything we thought was comprised just of atoms and material entities and everything happens by chance, it seemed, to a new universe in which really the universe does not exist in and of itself. The universe is only a manifestation and a creation, a continuous creation and dissolution and recreation and evolution, a continuous process of creation by this singular higher ordered universal conscious reality. The only thing that really exists is this universal consciousness reality, and it manifests as the universe every trillionth of a second, and then it dissolves back into this universal conscious reality, which exists in and of itself, and then universal conscious reality creates another frame of the universe. Now, why is this important? First of all, if there's no cause and effect within a frame or between the frames, we start realizing that the only way that the universe can exist and can evolve is only based on this universal consciousness reality. The same way that a film scenario or film plot and all the frames in the film exist not in and of themselves, and one frame cannot create the subsequent frame. There's no actually connection between one frame and another frame apart from the producer creating these series of frames and arranging them in a certain way that gives us that plot and that illusion, so to speak, about the progression of the film. In the case of the universe exists as and is being sustained, created, and evolved only by this universal conscious reality. So we start realizing that the whole way that the universe is evolving is not based on material causal interactions, but based on the sole operation of this universal consciousness reality. And that leads us now closer to the realization about Geulah. I give a metaphor about King Solomon wanting to build the divine temple. And we realize that through this metaphor that we obviously understand that when King Solomon decided to build that divine temple, he had to have a master architect that would present to King Solomon like a blueprint of the completed temple. And not only that, he would present to King Solomon the whole progression of the build-up of that immaculate divine temple before the first builder or construction worker that had the privilege of participating in the build-up of this immaculate divine temple, before the first builder of the temple could place the first piece, the first stone of this divine temple, there had to be this blueprint plan, this architectural blueprint plan. And that's a metaphor saying that essentially the way that this universal conscious reality has created and is continuously creating and evolving the universe could only, or it's suggested, it's hypothesized, that the build-up, the evolution of the universe is based on a blueprint plan that the universal conscious reality has and has had and has pre-planned the whole evolution of the universe towards that ultimate goal of Geulah. Geulah is a Hasidic Jewish term denoting a perfected state of the universe. Perfected state morally, spiritually, and even physically. So the assumption, the theoretical postulate of the Geulah goal, the reverse time Geulah goal postulate is telling us that in the same way that King Solomon had a blueprint picture or plan of the end result, the complete divine temple, and the whole build-up has been aimed and geared towards the achievement and the manifestation of this completed of this goal of the temple, ultimate goal of the temple. In the same way, universal conscious reality has and has pre-planned the whole evolution of the universe from inanimate matter, animate plants, animals, human beings, and then the Jewish people, of course, having a special role about this truth of the Geulah and of the singular reality of God in the world, and the whole of humanity actually reaching that perfected Geulah state. And so the idea is that the whole universe has been pre-planned and is being actually guided and cared for and evolved to reach that perfected Geulah goal state. And I think it's a good point to now focus on the characteristics of this Geulah perfected state. The Geulah perfected state of the universe, which is a moral, spiritual, and physical perfection of the universe, is that state in which humanity and in brackets science. Science now possesses the right, or has been given the mandate by humanity, to investigate truth, to lead humanity into realizing the ultimate truth behind the universe. So the Geulah perfected state is a state where science and humanity, more generally, will realize that there's only one singular reality. That singular reality is that universal conscious reality, which we said exists both in between the frames and during the frames. That's the only reality that's sustaining and evolving the universe. So the Geulah perfected state is a state in which science and humanity realize and recognize the sole reality of this universal conscious reality. In religious terms, we would call it God. But there's only one reality, and science and humanity is now realizing and recognizing, based on the empirical validation of this new God's physics paradigm, that there's only one singular reality. That's the universal conscious reality. That Geulah state, or perfected state, so it's characterized by one, the realization and recognition and acceptance by humanity and science of the sole reality of the universal conscious reality. And even more importantly, science now is recognizing and accepting this new understanding that the universal conscious reality is typified or characterized by certain unique characteristics. It's characterized by all goodness. It's creating and sustaining every living creature in our world. It's sustaining the whole universe. It's characterized by all goodness. It's characterized by morality. Since the universal conscious reality is unified, there's nothing apart in the universe that exists apart, independently of this universal conscious reality. And so there's a moral principle. I give a metaphor of a trampoline that has a metal bar connecting 2 points. That's a metaphor for the whole of humanity. Each point in this trampoline sheath is a human being, individual human consciousness. If we had a metal bar connecting 2 points and we had 1 point pushing the other point, that would signify, God forbid, one human being inflicting pain or suffering on another human being. The elasticity of the trampoline would cause the metal bar to react and have an impact on the first point. And that's essentially a metaphor denoting or illustrating what I call the dynamic equilibrium moral principle, essentially telling us that since there's only one reality, the universal conscious reality, that universal conscious reality also possesses a moral principle, essentially telling us that every time that human being, God forbid, inflicts pain or suffering on another human being, that sets in motion, that selects an equivalent future, one of multiple possible futures, for that individual human being that inflicted pain or suffering on another human being. They will have to experience, God forbid, that negative situation that they've inflicted pain on another human being, not as a punishment, but as a form of opening our eyes and educating us, so to speak, realizing that we're really part of the same reality. Same way that a morally balanced human being would not use their left hand to inflict pain on the right hand because it's part of themselves. Same way, the dynamic equilibrium moral principle is teaching humanity and each one of us that we're all like the right hand and left hand of the same entity. We're all part of the same universal conscious reality. And so that Geulah perfected state is characterized by humanity's recognition that there's only one a sole reality, the universal conscious reality, that it's characterized by all goodness, by morality, by peace and harmony, by steering the universe towards that realization of the Geulah perfected state. And so, in a sense, now we start realizing what the Lubavitcher Rabbi, what the Rabbi is telling us, the leader of the Jewish people, is telling us. He's telling us all along and encouraging us to open our eyes and see Geulah. Science is now reaching that point, which is essentially telling us there's only one reality. That reality is the universal conscious reality, or God in religious terms. That reality is all goodness. That reality is moral. that reality is characterized by peace, harmony, etc. It's steering the whole universe towards that perfected Geulah state. And as a matter of fact, we are now reaching the point, we've now reached the point of Geulah. Science is telling us that really we're at the beginning of Geulah, because when science, which again is leading the whole of humanity to discover the truth, when science is telling us that there's only one reality, which is that universal conscious reality, and that it's moral, that it's all goodness, that it cares about our moral actions and choices. Every time a human being makes a moral choice, a good moral choice, that sets in motion, that selects for that individual a good, positive future, and vice versa. I gave the example in the book, just an illustrative example that of a CEO driving to an annual meeting, a board meeting, in which that CEO is supposed to receive a big financial prize for his achievements. And on his way, he sees that there is a car accident and that there is an injured person. We say in Judaism that every person that saves another person's life has saved the whole world, or is considered as saving the whole world. So that so that human being seeing another injured person has a moral choice. He can either postpone or cancel that meeting and try to save that person's life, which is obviously the good, correct, moral, positive action choice, or he can make the other immoral choice and give an excuse why he cannot do that, why somebody else will do that, etc. Given, of course, that he can and he knows, he has the knowledge of how to take care of that person, and there's a real good chance, or there's a possibility that by evacuating that person, he will save that person's life or increase the chances of that person's life being saved. And so the illustration is that if that CEO has made the good moral choice of trying to save that person's life, the universal conscious reality, or God, would select for that individual courageous human being an equivalent future in which his life would be saved, and vice versa. And one more point that just to have a broader understanding, or a complete understanding, in this new God's physics paradigm, there is it's a recent development. There's 10 what I call hierarchical computational dimensions that the universal conscious reality is using every trillionth of a second. It's computing through these 10 hierarchical computational dimensions until it actually produces the next subsequent frame, which is the next future, the next present, immediate present. And one of those 10 hierarchical computational dimensions is called the tshuva. The tshuva is again a Jewish term, which implies that by each one of us making a conscious reflection and remorse over any immoral action that we've taken, and with this makes a conscious, resolute decision not to repeat any immoral action, and actually to choose to make a moral action, that teshuva will offset and will change and will omit the necessity for this universal conscious reality to present or to have that human being, if that human being inflicted pain or suffering on another human being, and they make teshuva, that would change and omit that future frame in which they had to experience that negative state. That again is part of our understanding that the universal conscious reality is all goodness. It cares about our moral choices. It's there's nothing separate from it, and it's steering the universe and all of us towards that perfected Geulah state. And so we're now reaching the point, the topic of today's important presentation on this holy day of Yud Aleph Nissan, Tafshin Pei Bet, is which is the birth date of our Rebbe, the leader of the Jewish people, is about the fact that Geulah is here, that we only have to open our eyes and see that Geulah is here. And I will close the circle now and say that as we open the talk today and saying that the Rebbe is telling us that the Geulah is here, that there's only one reality, which is God, or in religious terms, the universal conscious reality, in scientific terms, there's only one reality, God. And that reality is all goodness. It's caring about our moral actions. And it's brought us now to the point where science also is encouraging us to open our eyes and see the reality, see that there's only one reality, which is all goodness, that the world does not operate by chance, material causal interactions. The world is actually a very moral and good place. It's a place and it's an existence that is guided, that is actually being created and guided by this universal conscious reality or God. And it changes dramatically our life. It gives us tremendous hope, even amidst all the problems that we see around us. It's part of the universal conscious reality steering the universe towards that perfected Geulah state. And on this extremely important and holy day of Yud Aleph Nissan, the birth date of our Rabbi, the Lubavitcher Rabbi, the leader of the Jewish people, we are now fortunate enough to start realizing exactly what Rabbi has been calling us and is calling us all the time, to open our eyes and see that Geulah is here. Thank you very much.